In my opinion, preparation is the most important part of the interview, and I think it's useful to remember the old adage, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. As an example, you'd be staggered how many people don't even read the CV before they go into an interview.
I think one tip I would always give to interviewers is to get a CV in advance and highlight sections that are questionable or things you want to investigate further in the interview. Just get a highlighter and just mark them off. And it certainly gives you the impression that you prepare because you've gone through the CV in advance and it'll compare favourably with the candidate.
No, I agree with that because that's something I use myself. It's also important to remember when you're doing that, obviously highlight the education, the work experience, but also highlight a couple of things on their social side, hobbies and interests. One, it shows that you've read the CV, and two, it gives a softer end or start to the interview. In my experience, the introduction part of the interview is the bit that most people don't get right.
Yeah, I'd agree with that because I think most candidates go to an interview and they're very nervous. And I think it's important that an interviewer, as much as they can, tries to put that candidate at ease, makes them feel relaxed and calm about themselves so that you end up seeing the real person rather than some terrified candidate who's not giving you a good perception of who they are and what they can do.
I agree.
In terms of interview style, I think there's nothing better as an interviewer to ask good probing questions to anyone who's been interviewed.
Yeah, a good way to start that. If you go back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, if you've done some preparation and you've highlighted aspects on their CV that you want to talk about, make reference to those in your questions because it'll also demonstrate to the candidate that you've shown some interest in them and done some preparation on them as well.
I think moving that forward a little bit as well, if you can adapt your style depending on the candidate you're interviewing. So if you've got a candidate that likes to talk a lot, ask more direct questions that you'll get to the point quicker. And if you've got a candidate who's maybe a little bit shy and a little bit reticent in giving you answers, ask more open questions to try and get them to talk a bit more.
A note of caution on that though, be careful not to try and lead the candidate. We all have candidates that we interview and we like them and we want them to get the job, so we try to glean extra information out of them by leading them a little bit. It's important not to do that and to ask open questions.
So why would an interviewer need to sell the role to a candidate?
It's a good question that, James. A common mistake made during the interview process is just assuming that the person you're interviewing wants the job. The competition for jobs out there is quite fierce, so you need to make sure that the person you're talking to is interested in the role.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and occasionally you will have to sell the role very hard to a candidate to get them to say yes, particularly if it's a superstar candidate that you don't want to let slip through your fingers.
Yeah, definitely. If you ask questions about that to them in terms of why would they be interested in joining this company, what interests them about the job, those are good questions to ask. And as a tip, a good thing to listen for in their answer is if they start to talk about they're interested in the job because of the aspects of the job, they're not interested in you as a business. What you're really looking for from them is to them to start to sell the company back to you. So what is it that interests you about this role? Well, I like this role because it enables me to join a company like yours and you do this, this, this and this.
It's a personal preference of mine, but in an interview situation, I love to see a candidate perform under pressure. I think it really tests their mettle and you get to see the real person behind their interview face.
That's a great idea. One good way of doing that is in advance, prepare yourself a question that you think might be quite difficult for them to answer or at least that they're not going to have prepared for. Then that way you can answer it and then just sit back and listen to what they've got to say because it'll give you a genuine insight into what their character's like. Closing the interview in the right way is vital. One thing that you could do towards the end of the interview is ask the candidate whether they've got any questions. And then if they have, make sure A, you answer them in the right way and as full as you can, And then B, just check with the candidate that they have answered it, or you have answered it in the right way, and that they're happy with the answer that you've given.
One thing I will always do is to ask the candidate whether they're interested in the role and what appeals about it. And I think that gives you an insight as to, particularly if you like that candidate, what you might have to do to secure the candidate. The next, I would always give them a clear course of action as to what's going to happen, so you can manage their expectations and they know how it's going to pan out over the next few days or weeks.
And just one more thing, right at the very end, just remember to thank them for coming. It's vital to make the right impression, especially on favourable candidates, but on any, to be honest with you, because you want to leave them with the right impression about your business.